Hi, everyone. We're just going to get started here. Hopefully, you can see my screen. I'm Maya Gardiner. I'm a people and culture strategist. I own and operate Kootenay Talent and Recruitment, a company designed to support Kootenay businesses and organizations through staffing and team development. I'm a partner in the Kootenay Childcare Initiative, where I'm supporting childcare providers in recruitment and hiring strategies. The Kootenay Childcare Initiative, of course, is a wider initiative providing childcare providers also with business support and coaching. So, our goal is to raise capacity in the sector over the next couple of years. So I'm here to talk with you about employee retention today, and welcome to this webinar. I'm planning to give you about 5 smart retention strategies to help you build teams where people feel like they belong. Before we get started, I want to invite you to get comfortable. You don't have to have your camera on. We will have some time at the end for questions, but do feel free to speak up if you have something timely to ask. And I can see you, but I can't see you super well while I'm presenting. So if you just raise your hand or something, I may not notice that you want a question. So please just pop off your mic and speak up if you have a question. All right, with that, let's get started. So, childcare leaders today are navigating what feels like a perfect storm: ongoing staffing shortages, rising staff burnout, increasingly high expectations from families and funders and community members. The pressure to do more with less seems to get greater all the time. Vacant positions are hard to fill, and therefore, other staff are really stretched thin. Burnout's an issue. Childcare professionals leave the profession entirely, and that's a deeper conversation than we'll address this evening. Retention is a leadership responsibility across all industries. So, when it used to be primarily a measurement that was taken by HR, what does our retention cost look like compared to our replacement cost of staff? It's moved way beyond that, and it's now considered by most leadership in most sectors a primary area of focus for sustainable operations. The cost of replacing a staff is much higher than the cost of investing in your people, and you're going to see that throughout this webinar. When staff are supported and stay, it means better outcomes for you and your center and better outcomes for the families that you serve. So, as I mentioned, turnover is far more expensive than most centers realize. The visible line items are just the beginning. The deeper costs quietly erode your program's culture and quality every day. So, let's talk a little bit about visible costs. Visible costs are things like recruitment, advertising, and job postings, interview time for directors or senior staff, onboarding, training, orientation hours, or temporary coverage, just the cost of other staff filling in, the cost of having to hire temporary staff or fill in staff, or bringing your casuals in more frequently. The hidden cost is increased stress, emotional burden for the remaining staff, including yourselves, including managers who might be on the floor because they haven't replaced their staff. The lower morale and declining team cohesion, classroom instability affecting child development, erosion of parent trust and family enrollment. If you're eroding parent trust, if there's constant turnover, you might actually see your enrollment go down. So here's an interesting fact. Replacing one ECE can cost you $5,000 or more when all the direct costs, and maybe if you're factoring in indirect costs, but really the 5,000 or more can be just based on direct costs when that's tallied. So the missing person, the opportunity cost, how many families can you not take if you aren't fully staffed? What are we looking at for the cost of advertising and your cost invested in hiring that other person? Retention is always a smaller investment, and that has been proven time and again in various different industries. So, understanding why educators leave is the first step to building programs where they choose to stay. The reasons are rarely just about pay, and more often than not, there's some aspect of the job that has built up to be unbearable in some way. Therefore, they leave. Sometimes it's a natural family or personal life decision, like maybe they moved out of town, so they're leaving. So sometimes it's not something that you could have done differently or controlled. Sometimes people, once they do burn out, or sometimes they have a medical thing and they have to leave. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about why they would leave what seems like a perfectly good job when they don't have to, or their life isn't pushing them away from that. So, one of the reasons we're going to go through this little cycle here, and the reason this is in a little circle is these things can be a circular motion. One can lead to the next, can lead to the next. And there's not really for any given person, there might be a start or end place, but there kind of isn't. Like the things overlap, they can happen at the same time, and ultimately culminate in somebody giving their resignation. So, lack of growth opportunities without a clear path forward, staff might look elsewhere. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more deeply, but growth opportunities don't always have to look like laddering up through an organization. So, it doesn't have to mean that they're getting promoted all of the time. Sometimes it means horizontal growth, which basically refers to maybe they are getting more education, they're fulfilling their career goals a little bit more, they're able to work with certain types of kids or families. So things like that. We'll get into that a little bit more in a couple of slides. Leadership support feels lacking. So, when staff feel unseen by leadership, engagement definitely drops fast. And we're going to talk a fair bit about that. But and I've emphasized feels lacking. That doesn't mean that leadership support is lacking. It doesn't mean that the leadership is doing a bad job at leading or the management's doing a bad job at managing. It just means that the employee isn't feeling that. So sometimes it does mean that there can be improvements in the leadership. Whatever it is, if the employee doesn't feel valued, that's what's going to motivate them to disengage and potentially leave their job, which also leads to burnout. Burnout and unsustainable workloads can really be a main reason that people are going to leave. And again, burnout is a whole different webinar. There's a lot that goes into burnout that's more than meets the eye. Heavy ratios, extra documentation, or having to document, when the day is over, or fitting, not having the space to fit that in the day, the emotional labor, these things can push your educators out of their job. Disconnection and a lack of belonging can also contribute to that burnout and also relates to the leadership support feeling like it's lacking, or maybe that lack of growth opportunities. So, disconnection and lack of belonging means that the person feels isolated and they feel maybe excluded from decisions, then excluded from the wider group. They don't feel like they're connected to the rest of the staff or part of the team. So these things can come up and we might not even notice these things right away. And the person isn't likely to say it because there is definitely between management and staff, there's a power dynamic. And people don't always say, "Hey, I don't feel like I belong here." Sometimes they do. And then you're lucky because you can have that conversation and work through it. But sometimes they don't even know that for themselves, that that's what they're feeling. They just feel a disconnect. So they disconnect. And then compensation concerns, wages that miss the work's complexity and send the wrong message. So if your wages are unusually low, then the message is we can't value you at the rate that others could value you. Um, Wages are rarely a primary reason that people leave, but they do contribute. And when wages don't satisfy a person's cost of living, then how can they keep working there? So competitive wages are really important. It's important that your wages are at least at the level that most other centers are at. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that one in this next slide. So I'm going to dive into the strategies now. We've talked a little bit about why it's important to engage your staff and why retention is important, what it is that causes people to not want to stay. And now we're going to talk about those five strategies. So the first strategy I'm going to give you is to maximize wages. While salary is rarely the reason that people leave, it can be coupled in with other things and add to the reasons that people leave. And sometimes, let's face it, sometimes it is the reason that people leave. It's a factor in people feeling valued. If your staff person doesn't make enough money to support their needs personally, they're going to suffer at work. They're going to come to work not knowing if they can make ends meet, which is going to have them eventually burn out due to pressure coming in from all sides. And also because it's hard to feel inspired about your job if at the end of your challenging day, you're also faced with a lot of personal challenges. So, as an employer, when you can offset that, you're really helping your employee want to stay with you. So fair compensation is essential to ECE retention. Pay as much as you can and offer benefits. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what benefits can look like. So here in the Kootenays, we're lucky because we can have fairly competitive wages compared to across BC. We, of course, have the provincial wage enhancement, which some ECEs are eligible for. And then we also have that Columbia Basin Trust wage top up, which is great because that gives Kootenay, a lot of Kootenay positions, not all positions are eligible, not all centers are eligible, but a lot of our Kootenay positions can be have an elevated wage, which is fantastic. And I have noticed that a lot of our centers are offering a fairly competitive wage just in terms of what ECE offers are across the province. And this is just really important to consider because it's not just are you competitive in your town? Are you paying as much wage as you can? It really is it competitive with ECEs across the province where if someone wants to live in BC and be an ECE, are they going to choose your job and are they going to stay there? Or are there better options? And sometimes, especially in recruitment, we don't always realize that that comparison for a candidate is happening everywhere all the time. So if I'm on the move and I can choose to move to Kimberley or I can choose to move to Kamloops, and I can make more money in Kamloops, I'm probably going to move to Kamloops. So just given that all the other factors were similar, right? There's some other things that we have that are benefits in the Kootenays. And my next strategy for you, of course, is based on what I keep saying that compensation alone doesn't retain educators who are running on empty. So our lifestyle here in the Kootenays is enviable. It's what we lean into to attract people to live and work here. So in my recruitment life, I'm constantly highlighting what a great place the Kootenays is to live and work. If your staff are encouraged to access that lifestyle, they might feel an additional sense of belonging and satisfaction. So it doesn't do a Kootenai person a lot of good to live in the Kootenays if they aren't empowered to also live that life and enjoy that life, all that we have to offer. So Create a Kootenay specific wellness package is my next strategy. And that's just a little term I've kind of made up. But what's in it isn't made up. These are things that really are statistically supporting people to stay in jobs. So, wellness days offer paid recovery time that is separate from sick days, or make your sick days so that they're called wellness days. Make sure that your staff can use those days for keeping themselves well before they get sick. And there's a lot of research coming out in recent years around just how valuable that is. Because an instinct might be, well, people will abuse that. They'll take all their wellness days, even if they don't need it. They do need it. They do need it. And what ends up happening is if they take their wellness days, they're less likely to need sick days. And when we take sick days because we got really sick, we might need more sick days. And when we use wellness days and we keep ourselves feeling good and inspired about our work, one, we show up stronger, we show up more committed, we show up more productive. And in childcare, more empathetic and compassionate and more capable of working with the children in a positive way. So we want people to show up well because that actually supports the business as a whole, which supports the money making component, right? So now we're not losing money on people being less productive. Also, we are winning in the case that then, if they're taking less sick days or they don't need that leave of absence because they've pushed themselves past the point. So, we're catching sick before it's sick by giving people wellness days. And if they take that wellness day to go skiing and they come back just twice as inspired, yay, let them do it. These can also be personal days, but advocate for putting personal days in to some of these more family-friendly policies, which I'm going to talk about in a second. The other thing about that is there's this provincial standard of so many sick days. You can go beyond that standard, and it is one of the least expensive ways to make your staff feel incredibly valued. Flexible scheduling is the next thing I would recommend. Provide condensed hours if needed, split shifts if needed, adjusted start times where possible. So I know that's really difficult. And what happens is the manager bears the brunt of that. And we get into their kind of a leaders eat last concept where if you're the leader, you're putting in that extra effort to keep your staff happy and to make sure that their schedule suits their needs because it helps them live that life outside of work that's also important to their sense of balance. So if you, even when you interview, you can ask what is someone's ideal schedule. And if they're already hired, you can ask, like, what is their ideal schedule? I have worked with clients before where a certain staff person is always showing up late. And the instinct and what we used to do as managers really is say, you have to show up on time. So we start the progressive discipline process and we start helping that person understand they have to show up on time. Here's a technique that works very, very well. Hey, I noticed you come in late most days. How come you're late? Is there something going on in your life that makes it difficult for you to get here on time? And then what you might find out is they have to drop their own kid off before they get to work, or, their partner gets home with the car just before they have to leave, or just when they have to leave, or that makes them 5 minutes late every day. Whatever it is, it might be something you can actually accommodate. And if you can accommodate that, you are winning. That builds the kind of loyalty that helps people stay. So third, I would recommend lifestyle friendly policies, and this can be very Kootenay specific, um, and it can be broader. So it can be things like top ups for leaves. And of course, all of this falls within affordability. But if you subscribe to benefits and your employees get benefits, if you have short-term leave benefits or leave top up policies, that's very helpful. If you have emergency provisions, so as in you're flexible if there's an emergency, someone needs to take a day off, maybe they have the wellness days available, or maybe they have personal days. So, providing for personal days for appointments or personal days for emergencies. And if they've used up all those personal days, sometimes we can just give them the day. We can be flexible like that. And it's a gift. It's a gift that builds goodwill and it builds loyalty. And family-friendly accommodations, those look like things like if you're a single parent or if you're a parent or you have a family, what are the needs of that family? So things like dropping your child off at school before you start your shift. If someone has to do that every time, then let's avoid making their shift conflicting with that, right? Or if sometimes it means giving someone time off to go to their child's Christmas concert or their child's spring recital or something like that. Sometimes it means reworking the schedule a little bit so that someone can be there for their child and it makes it easier for them to balance their personal life with their work life. And those kinds of family-friendly policies really go a long way towards retention. And then we have sustainable workloads, so reducing paperwork or pressure, meeting overload to protect their energy. So understanding when somebody is starting to feel overwhelmed, and before they start to feel overwhelmed, understanding the balance. I could also do a whole webinar on strengths assessments and really managing people towards their strengths. But if you play to people's strengths, they're less likely to get overwhelmed. If they're good at certain things, so if you have someone on your team member that's really good at the paperwork and you pair them up with the other person that's really good at cleanup, well, maybe one does all the paperwork while the other one does the cleanup. There's just ways to balance these things out so that it really helps the staff feel seen, it helps them feel heard, it helps them feel supported, also reduces burnout. So, in the long run, saves you money. The other thing I didn't put specifically on here is that there are ways to make relationships with other local businesses where you can get perks. And I think that would fit either in lifestyle friendly policies. Um, I guess it kind of fits there. But you can make a deal with the local ski hill that your employees get so much percent off on so many days. So for 3 days this year, you could ski for 10% off because we made a deal with the ski hill. Maybe some of the parents of the children who come to your center own businesses and are willing to provide perks for your employees. And if they do that, and if you can make those kinds of deals throughout the community, for one, that's a wonderful attractor when you're recruiting, is that you have these additional perks. And also, it helps keep people there. They feel like an important member of the community, they feel valued. It helps them feel like they matter and the work they do matters, and that's being honored by other members of the community as well. So that has a really strong resonating effect. Okay. Let's move on to strategy number three. Um, and that's to look at growth in the job. And as I said earlier, that growth in the job doesn't just look like laddering up, although it can. And if you have those options, that's wonderful. And we can intentionally build those options into our business, into our center. And yes, childcare centers can have laddering up options. You can have, and this gets to the first point on the slide, you can support certifications and specialties. So if you have an ECEA, you can support them in becoming an ECE. And once they become an ECE, maybe you support them in becoming an infant toddler, as getting their infant toddler specialization. This helps you and them, and it also helps them feel like you care about their growth. And they might never want to move that way. They might never want to ladder up in your organization. If there's opportunities for management or opportunities even for like you go away and a certain somebody takes on the extra responsibility because they've shown that interest and skill, that is really good as well. So helping people grow, whether it's laterally or horizontally, simply helps them feel seen. And also, we all want to feel like we can expand, like we can learn new skills. So it can be simple little things like the third point on the slide, mentorship for emerging leaders. Can you, if someone wants more than your center offers, you can connect them with potential members of other centers or other community members or a community of practice where mentorship can happen, where they can learn new things. They can maybe work on areas of their personal practice. So, what does their goal look like? What does it look like if you ask them, what area of your practice would you like to work on? I ask them that in interviews, is there an area of your practice you're looking to improve? And almost everyone is really happy to share what area of practice they're looking to improve because they usually are. And if you're the employer that asks that question and then you actually help them do that, that's a really helpful thing to do. Um, Paid professional development then can contribute to that. So let's say they're working on a specific area of their practice. Well, you can send them to a webinar. You can pay for a conference. You can pay for workshops or training days. You can bring in a facilitator and train your whole staff. So there's options around supporting people's growth in their role. And it doesn't have to be movement in the career so much as growth in the role. And have those clear growth conversations. Talk regularly about what it is your employees want. Um, what those have those check-in points and get a sense of, where they want to grow or what improvements they feel they need to make. And then don't just forget about it. Make a plan and support them with a sense of purpose. Because if you just forget about it, then it feels to them like they're on their own in that journey. But if you partner with them in that journey, it's just a simple mindset of knowing that you support that helps them feel like connected to you as a leader, and it builds that loyalty and they'll want to stay. So strategy number four, and I sort of touched on it on the last slide, but this is more of a full step in a strategy all on its own. So what I suggest is connecting people professionally. So especially if you have staff that are new in the area or have been around for a while but aren't connecting and feeling a sense of belonging, or maybe they don't quite jive with all of the team, but they're really good at their job, so you're not sure what to do with that. This can be a really winning strategy where you can connect them with other networks. So collaboration. Let your educators visit other centers. And I know sometimes there's a sense of competitiveness there, or maybe the other centers in town aren't centers you would really want your staff learning from. There's definitely different attitudes about different centers, but what I would encourage is collaboration. I think it's really important that different centers in small communities are able to understand the strengths that each has to offer, and what's working for the community as a whole. And those collaborations can really benefit the children and the families and the community as a whole. If everybody's scrambling to grow their center, it means that we know this statistically, the vast majority of children who need care are on a wait list, right? So there's lots of room to collaborate with centers. There's no reason for competitiveness. There's room for everyone's business to grow. There's room for everyone's business to thrive. And then there's pedagogical, I do it every time I have to slow down to say this word, pedagogical circles. Bringing educators together to reflect, to share challenges, to strengthen professional identity. So essentially, this would be a network of people that are a community of practice, a network of people in childcare that are a community of practice. I don't think there's any in the Kootenays. I could be wrong about that. I understand there have been in the past, but maybe it's time to get that going. Maybe it's okay to build informal circles. And of course, we have the CCRRs and partnerships with them. There's resources, there's connection, and I know they organize ways for different centers to connect. So I think that's a really important place to be sort of connected in. And the idea is to use communities, cohorts, associations to connect your educators so that they don't have professional isolation. It's such an important role in the community to be caring for and educating children. It's one of the most important roles out there, right? This is our future, and you all are contributing to that going well. But there is definitely a need for connection. You shouldn't be doing it in isolation, and people shouldn't feel like they are isolated in that process. And maybe even you're a center with two staff and you feel incredibly isolated. You may feel isolated as a leader. You may have one staff member who feels isolated in your whole group, or maybe your center feels somewhat isolated. So, really look at that sense of connection and how you can support building that. Something that's really important to say here is to always be careful to respect people's space if they're not the person who likes to network and connect, especially if that's outside of work. So it's okay during work if you've organized work hours for a learning and a connecting point. It's okay to expect that people participate in that. If these are things that are happening outside of work, it's important to honor that some people prefer to disconnect rather than connect. And if they're feeling less connected in the community, but they want to be connected, it's a good idea to help with that. If they're less connected in the community, but they like it that way because at the end of their day, they just want to read a book by themselves, that is up to them. And you're supporting them as an individual person by also supporting that. Individualizing is a really important part of helping your team thrive as a team. So I've done so much work with teams, and teams, the idea is they need to jive, right? There needs to be synergy amongst the team. One of the key ways that synergy happens amongst a team is when leaders deliberately understand each individual and what strengths they bring to the team, where to put the pressure and where to not put the pressure. And then everyone feels like they're bringing their best to the table, and the team starts to jive and have that synergy. So if your team isn't jiving, it's possible it's not just the way they're not connecting. It's possible it's a proactive effort on your part that's needed to understand each individual and to begin to connect them, which also is a whole webinar in itself. Okay, strategy number 5, leading or managing. Um, the respect loop, the feedback loop. This all works together. So let me explain that a little bit. Managing is planning, organizing, executing process towards your goal. Leading is inspiring, strategizing, and engaging others in your vision. Like most people in the workplace, educators want to matter. They want respect. Feedback is respect. Feedback is kind, even if it's feedback where improvement is needed or that was an unacceptable approach to that conversation with that family. That feedback is important. Letting your employee accidentally spiral into a zone of not feeling like you understand, respect them, isn't kind. And then mistakes turn into more mistakes versus mistakes turn into learning opportunities. And the employee feels more engaged by the fact that you notice them, you care, and you want to see them thrive. Recognition is amongst the most powerful retention tool a leader has. So, beyond feedback around the difficult things, consistent feedback around what people are doing well is really powerful. And that can be public. And when I say public, I don't mean in the newspaper, I don't mean in front of the community public. I mean public in front of other staff or a compliment in front of a family. Like, I really appreciated how you just handled that conversation with the child, right? Um, or, you know, great job. That's really helpful. It can be that simple, but that's feedback as well. And we forget that 80% of the feedback you should be giving should be positive. And that then far outweighs when there's a mistake or a learning, the trust is built and people are happy to hear from you and walk through the feedback on that learning process because they know that you believe in them. And you've built that through the positive feedback as well as all the other stuff. So, a few ways, as you're seeing on the slide, that you can show value and appreciation to your employees are stay interviews. So, often people are aware of exit interviews. When someone leaves, you want to ask them why they're leaving. And if you don't do exit interviews, I do recommend it. So, when someone puts in their resignation or they tell you they have to go, it's a really good idea to book a time to sit down and talk to them, even if it's just 20 minutes, but create quiet space and actually ask them for their feedback on how it was working there, what you might have done differently. And, if they've divulged why they're leaving, then you can talk about it. And if it's for personal reasons, we have to respect that. If they just say it's personal, we have to respect that. But sometimes it's actually because of something that we could have influenced. And it's nice to know that. But more importantly, what many people don't do is stay interviews. You want to find out what's working and not working for people before they ever leave. So, a couple times a year, you can do it a number of different ways, depending on how many staff you have and how close you are to them and what those conversations look like. But even if you have day-to-day conversations and you feel like, I know my staff very well, creating the space that's private, that's set aside to have a conversation about what it is they like about working there, what, if anything, is not working. Ask for feedback on your leadership and whether the management is working. Are they happy with their schedule? A couple things like that are really valuable in helping people feel like you care, you see them, you want to support them, and also it gives you huge insight. So if you're connecting a couple times a year with your employees or once a year with everyone, um, but I would say, every few months, kind of be making your rounds and connecting with people and having a specific time, whether you take them for coffee or whatever it is, where you can sit down and chat with them about why they're there, even if they've been there for 20 years, especially if they've been there for 20 years. The next one on the slide is recognition culture. So again, make that recognition, make that appreciation specific. Call people out for the things they're doing well. Make it public, do it in front of their colleagues. If you have a weekly staff meeting, mention what people have been doing well and try to balance it out. Try over time to make sure you're pulling out, even if you have an employee that kind of underperforms and it's hard to find the things they're doing well, there's probably something. So, make sure that every few weeks, you're kind of making your rounds and trying to call out different people. And it's not just my superstar employee always gets called out for doing everything so well. Um, and really do look at the people who kind of don't do a lot of things well, because the more you reinforce the things they are doing well, the more willing they are to keep learning for you, to keep applying for you, their knowledge and their skills and their energy to keep showing up in a positive way. it can far outweigh any negatives, and therefore your employee feels that sense of commitment. And even if someone is tempted to leave for the money, when they start thinking about the powerful manager that you are, the powerful leader that you are, the connection that they have with you, the support that you give them, they won't want to leave that. So if you're doing stay interviews, someone might even say to you, yeah, I've actually been offered a job over here and it pays a little more, but I really like your leadership, or I really like working here. The culture here is so good. This is how we create it. And that leads to into this coaching leadership style. So I really recommend a coaching leadership style, and you've probably heard it called all kinds of things. There are nuances. There's multiple leadership styles, and there's nuances. Leading from behind, supportive leadership, servant leadership. But coaching leadership style is essentially that you are asking questions and not in an interrogative way. They're questions like, how does that work for you? Maybe you implemented a change last week and you want to just check in with each staff person as you're, you know, having a little chat casually about something. You might say, hey, what about this change we implemented last week? How's that working for you? Rather than always giving directives, rather than it always being like, you have to come out firm with this was good, this wasn't good, or we made this change and you don't seem to be embracing it. Instead of a statement like that, it's kind of more, we made this change. How are you doing with that? And then you move into more questions and observations and conversations. And true coaching really does ask questions in a way that leads the person to their own solutions. So they might say, well, it's not really working for me because, and sometimes if they're not used to this style, it'll take a while for them to be honest with you or feel comfortable, especially if it's a vulnerable kind of place for them to be. But if you keep doing it and you don't respond in a negative way, you respond in a positive way, then eventually they'll get more and more comfortable and it'll be more of a feedback loop. So the coaching leadership style is really quite important in terms of just being an inspirational leader that going back to what I said earlier, that people want to feel seen, they want to feel understood, um, and they want to feel empowered. And a coaching leadership style helps do that. And then frequent feedback. And my favorite style of feedback is situation, behavior, impact. So the situation was this. I'm trying to think of a quick example that's relevant, but you took the kids out to play today, and I noticed that you brought a lot of toys and gave them a lot of structure. And I'm feeling like I'm wondering if there was a reason why you chose that approach. And now you're into feedback and coaching. Or if it's strong feedback and it's not coaching yet, your situation is you took the kids out today and I noticed that you had brought a lot of toys and it was very structured play. And then we're into behavior, right? So we've said the situation. You took the kids out today with a lot of toys and it was structured. Now the behavior. And I noticed that you were getting a little frustrated when they were falling outside the structure. I don't know if this example is real. I don't work in childcare, so bear with me. Um, and that you were getting frustrated when they fell outside the structure. So now you're talking about their behavior. This is what I noticed. And then it's the impact. What that seemed to do was cause the children to want even less to be inside the structure. And I noticed then the children weren't engaged in creative play and problem solving. So now you're explaining why that behavior wasn't necessarily working. So situation, behavior, impact. You can just write down SBI. And then you can follow up with coaching too. Then you can still say, so I'm wondering, if there's a reason that you chose that method, or if there's something going on that outside of that that made you feel a little bit frustrated, whatever it is, you take it from there. It's also really important to give that frequent positive feedback, but also the frequent feedback that is in the moment. So if something's happening in the moment, instead of getting frustrated with your employee and just taking over, it's important to kind of just say, hey, can we just take a second and take a deep breath? I'm feeling like we need to do this way because of this, right? This helps people feel like they learn quicker and it helps them feel like you're seeing what's happening. Um, as long as there's not emotion in that. So with feedback, try to keep your emotion out. It's about the action, not the person. Okay, I feel like I kind of went on a bit long with that slide, so we're going to move on. Let's just take a quick snapshot of the 5 strategies and why each one's important. Each one of these strategies addresses a core emotional need that drives retention. So, circling back to why these things drive retention. When people feel valued, future focused, connected, respected, and like they're empowered to do their jobs well, they stay. So, why does funding and compensation matter? I need to feel valued for the complexity of what I do, for the depth at which I give myself in my job. I need to feel valued. Also, I need to feel like I can make ends meet at home because I deserve that when I give so much of myself to my job. Wellness and flexibility. Why does it matter? I need this career to be sustainable my whole life. I need to feel like this job is sustainable. I don't want to go to work wondering if this is going to keep going this way until I have nothing left. And if I'm starting to feel like I have nothing left, I need my cup filled. Career pathways. I need to see a future for myself here. Most people don't like Groundhog Day. Most people don't like stagnant. Even if it's small growth, people like different levels of growth. I've had people say to me, hey, Maya, everybody doesn't need to be growing all the time. And it's true. Some people like more and constant growth. Other people like it, smaller bits or little bits. And sometimes it's just little shifts or changes that help people feel like their career is growing, their knowledge is growing, and it re-inspires people, even if they think they don't love that. They might really get an extra spark from that opportunity to learn something new. Most people want some level of growth, and they do need to see their future there. So, mentorship and community. I don't want to feel professionally alone. I don't want to show up at work and feel lonely. I don't want to feel like I have no one to talk to. I don't want to feel isolated. So we're going to support them through mentorship and community. Respect and feedback. I want to know that I matter to this team. And there's another one I would add to that. I want to know that I am doing well, that I'm a valued part of this team. And most people don't want to accidentally hurt other people. So I want to know when I need to correct my behavior, if I'm stepping on someone's toes. And I want to feel that creates psychological safety. I want to feel safe in my job. Maybe I'm the kind of person that just rolls ahead with things, and I don't always think about how that impacts other people. And when somebody steps back and says to me, hey, that impacts us like this, and I go, oh my goodness, I never would have wanted that. And now I am empowered to make a shift that helps me be more comfortable. So that is respect. That feedback was very respectful and allows me to be more respectful. It's not blame. We're going to take a minute just to address the myths that might be holding you back from retention. These are myths that hold a lot of people back from retention, and we have talked about them already. I'm going to reinforce them in this context. Two of the most common misconceptions about staff retention will actually prevent leaders from taking the right action. And that's one, people only leave for money. No, leadership, belonging, growth, those are the real drivers of retention. You can raise wages and still lose great people to a culture that is toxic or even not working or even just not inspiring. I mean, sometimes there's nothing toxic about it. There's nothing that's not particularly working, but there's maybe also not something that is particularly working or inspiring. That takes intention. Myth number two, low turnover means high engagement. So we can't just measure engagement by turnover. Um, if you're losing staff and you have a lot of churn, you already know there is a problem. But if you're not losing staff and you don't have churn and everything just kind of goes along, but the motivation isn't there, the inspiration isn't there, the performance isn't there. You have sort of medium performers. People can quiet quit. That's very real. People can show up at work, they're physically there, they're no longer emotionally invested, they no longer trust their employer or their job. They maybe don't see a future for themselves there. So these are the pieces that can really cause people to quiet quit. Um, so they're staying at that point, maybe for the money and because it's a job, and they're not moving and it's the only job they have. They're not staying because they love it there. And we want people to love it there because then they're really going to stay. They're going to motivate other people to stay. You're going to have happier children and happier families. So the deal with that is that the retention investment is much lower than the cost of replacing someone. When you have to replace even one person, you're losing money compared to the effort you would put into retaining all of them. So, wellness programming is a very low cost, as we went through. Most of those suggestions I've given you are low cost, almost no cost. Stay interviews, zero cost. Recognition culture is simply time and intention. And so are stay interviews. That's time and intention. The scheduling, I mean, it's a cost to you, it's a cost to your cognitive load, but you're putting time and intention behind supporting people through scheduling. All of these things just take some creativity, your intention, your time, and maybe even a plan. Maybe it's a plan on paper, in which case you don't have to be as creative all the time and it reduces the cognitive load of building out a retention plan. But what that does is help retain all of your employees, not just the one that might leave, but all of them. It helps energize them so they're more productive at work. They get more done, they're happier people. And so then you have happier children and you have happier families. And that's the kind of line of work you're in where it really, really matters. It's not like people are showing up to the factory and it's okay if they're not emotionally invested, which it's not okay there either, by the way. If you're showing up at a factory emotionally invested, you're also way more productive. People are way more productive at things, and burnout is greatly reduced if people are energized by their work, if they're empowered at their work, and if they're feeling like they are emotionally connected to that work, it's working for them, they have a future there. That's what prevents burnout. Again, a whole webinar in itself. There's a lot of other factors to that conversation, but replacement cost reality, as we already went through, it's going to cost about 5,000 in almost in hard costs. But if you include your time, it's definitely going to go there. So your time may not be seen as a hard cost, but it really should. It really should. So if you're the owner or the manager of a center and you're having to step in to replace some when someone needs to be replaced. So you're on the floor now. Plus, you have the added workload of hiring that person and onboarding and training that person. And then if that person's at risk of leaving in 2 months, anyways, the time cost to you is phenomenal. And if you did the math on what you would be paying yourself per hour, you'd be amazed. So we're talking a minimum of 5,000. when it comes to everything from training time, institutional knowledge, the impact on the rest of your team, the onboarding, the administration, interview time, the cost of posting the job. So, true retention means your staff are present, they're engaged, they're growing, and they're choosing to stay. It doesn't just mean your staff haven't left yet. All of these retention strategies are also attraction strategies. So when you have happy staff that pass the word around, and when you can offer some of these additional benefits, these are things that attract other people to come work at your center. It's going to be, wow, I just graduated with my ECE and I really want to work with these guys. I hear such great things about them. You want to be that employer, not where you have a new graduate in your town and they're looking at moving because they're just not sure that they care to work at any of the centers in town. And I'm sure most of you are already doing a lot of these things. I'm sure most of you are already doing at least one of these things, but possibly a lot of these things. So before leaving today, take a few quiet minutes to reflect honestly on your own program. Take a minute to think about the most powerful retention tool that you currently have in play. And I haven't given you all the retention tools out there in the world. There are many, many, many. I've given you my top 5 for the childcare sector in the Kootenays based on what I've been seeing. So I think these are probably important and helpful. But if you are implementing a tool or if you are consistently engaging with your staff in a way that's retaining them that wasn't on this list, that still counts. So think about one or two of the ways that you're already proactively retaining your staff. And how can you protect that? How can you celebrate it? How can you build on it intentionally? And then the other thing I want you to do is pick one concrete thing you're not doing that you think you could or that you think you could improve. So something you'd like to introduce or something that you think, yeah, I do that, but I could do it better. And what does the next 30 days look like if you focus on making that improvement or implementing that? So make a little 30-day plan for one new retention tactic. And then maybe share your reflection with a colleague or write it down because I'm sure I don't have to tell you, you're educators. Accountability, even if it's informal, really increases our follow through. So we're way more likely to do something if we make ourselves accountable. And we're almost at time here, but just a few key resources and support networks, which I'm sure you're all well aware of. Childcare BC, ECE BC, your CCRR networks, and of course the registry, where you can make sure that certificates are up to date, stay current with your staff certificates, etc. And then, of course, the Kootenay Childcare Initiative, which is relatively new. We've launched last fall. We've been planning and et cetera for about a year now. Um, and if you're enrolled in the initiative, you might have a business coach and you might be working with me on recruitment or one or the other. But you have access to free business coaching and you have access to recruitment. And you can contact me anytime. You can contact me anytime if it's about anything people related, team development. How do I, structure my team, or I'm having a problem with this staff? What do you think about that? Or I'm training. Can you look at my training plan? Whatever your coach is going to have their strengths as well. So whatever areas you feel like you need to reach out to me for, please do. You're invited at all times. So finally, to end it off, just to reinforce, strong programs are built by stable, supported teams. When educators feel valued, when they feel sustained, when their cups are full, when they're connected and they feel like they belong, they're going to stay. And when they stay, the children thrive, the families trust you, and your program can grow stronger. So, the best investment you can make in the children that you serve and in the children of our communities is the investment that you make in the adults that show up for them every day, including yourself. Do not forget yourself in these retention strategies. If you are a manager or you are an owner operator, taking care of you is where it all starts. If you fall apart, everything falls apart. So please take care of yourselves and thank you for the work that you do and for leading with intention.